The town of Copper Creek didn't look like much from a distance, just a handful of weather-faded buildings clinging to a dirt road that cut through the valley like an old scar. But to the people who lived there, it was the center of the world. A place where lives were built, lost, traded, bartered, and sometimes buried without ceremony. The air always smelled of leather, iron, and dust. Horses snorted from hitching posts outside the saloon, and the clatter of boots on wooden boardwalks mixed with the occasional echo of laughter or a drunken argument. Cowboys came and went, travelers passed through heading to places whispered about more than truly known, but some men stayed. Some roots took, even in dry soil. Elias Ward was one of those men shaped by the land rather than welcomed by it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet in the way storms are quiet when they build on the horizon. People respected him, though they rarely understood him. His hands were scarred from rope, from cold nights holding iron too tight, from fights with both men and nature. But his eyes told more than any scars could. They held memory, winter, hunger, loneliness, loss, and yet, they also held something else, loyalty. The kind that wasn't loud or proud, but steady. The kind that did not break. Jonah Hale was everything Elias wasn't. Light to his shadow, laughter to his silence. Jonah walked like wind carried him, talked like every sentence needed to be brighter than the last, and smiled the way men smile when they believe the world hasn't yet decided to hurt them. If Elias watched the world, Jonah chased it. And yet, somehow, they fit together like two halves of a thing neither of them could name. They had met as boys, in the riverbeds below the cottonwood tree. Jonah had been skipping stones, Elias had been trying to catch fish by hand, stubborn as always. Jonah had laughed at Elias's soaked frustration, and somehow, from that day on, they were rarely seen apart. They learned the land together. Rode horses under the burning sun. Shared cheap whiskey and dried meat by the fire. Saved each other more times than either would admit. They worked cattle runs for a few ranchers, fought off rustlers during hard seasons, and helped bury men they knew, men they admired, men they feared. Copper Creek didn't offer gentleness. The world beyond didn't either. But they survived, as long as they had each other. It was Jonah who first heard the talk. Silver in the mountains. Mouths whispered it in the saloon, in the stables, in the dark corners where men who had lost too much went to dream of something better. Most dismissed it as rumor, same as every gold rush tale that had left men starving in empty valleys. But Jonah listened, and when he listened to something, truly listened, he didn't let it go. He said the mountains were calling. He said destiny was waiting. Elias didn't believe in destiny. He believed in work and sweat and the things a man earned with his hands. But when Jonah spoke, Elias heard the kind of hope that only appears a few times in a man's life, if at all. One night, beneath a sky so full of stars it felt like the heavens were leaking light, Jonah pressed the idea again. They sat by a fire just beyond town limits, horses tied, the flames snapping against the cold wind. Jonah's voice was softer than usual, as though afraid the firelight might burn the dream if he spoke too loud. We could have something of our own, Eli. Land, cattle, a home. We don't have to die working another man's dreams. Elias didn't answer immediately. He watched the sparks rise toward the sky like tiny lives burning bright only for a moment. He had seen hope turn to hunger. He had seen dreams poison men faster than whiskey. He had seen good intentions fall apart under the weight of wanting too much. But he had never told Jonah no. Not really. Jonah was the closest thing to family he had ever known. And loyalty was the root of everything he believed in. He agreed with a slow nod, the kind that sealed futures. They spent the next week gathering supplies, pickaxes, lanterns, rope, dried goods. No one in town encouraged them. A few men shook their heads in silence. A few others placed quiet bets on how long it would take for the mountain to kill them. But Jonah walked with that brightness in his step, and Elias walked beside him like a guardrail against the world. The journey up the mountain was punishing. The trail narrowed to sharp ridges that cut boots and tore at the hooves of their mules. Nights were biting cold, mornings came heavy and slow. But Jonah kept speaking of ranch land, flat, green, river-fed. He described a house with a large porch and rocking chairs for hot evenings. He spoke of peace like it was something they could carve with their own hands. And Elias listened, because Jonah's dreams were the kind that painted meaning onto hardship. On the fifth day, they found the vein. It didn't look like glory. It looked like a scar in the rock, metals twisted through stone like veins inside a living thing. But when Jonah struck it, the chisel ringing sharp and clear, silver shone back. Real. Undeniable. The kind of discovery that could change everything. Jonah laughed. A wild, breathless laugh that sounded too big for the mountain. Elias felt his chest tighten, not with greed, but with a strange, disbelieving gratitude. Maybe, he thought, maybe life was about to give back. Days passed. They carved, chipped, packed ore into sacks until their backs buckled and fingers bled. At night, Jonah talked more than ever, about cattle brands, future wives they hadn't met, a life better than any story they'd heard. Elias said little, but he felt something warm bloom in him, cautious but real. Then one morning, the warmth shattered. Elias woke to the cold. The fire had burned out. The mule was gone. The packs of silver, gone. Jonah was nowhere. The silence was so complete it felt like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Elias searched the camp, calling Jonah's name once, twice, louder, until his voice cracked against the stone walls. Then he saw the note, pinned by Jonah's knife. I can't share a destiny meant for one. Forgive me. Time stopped. The wind died. The world narrowed to a single pulse of disbelief, then pain so sharp it stole his breath. Jonah had not just taken the silver. He had taken their promise. Their brotherhood. Their future. Elias walked down the mountain alone. Step by step, mile by mile, hunger gnawing at him, betrayal burning through him like fever. The land blurred. Days bled into nights. He arrived in Copper Creek half a ghost. He spoke to no one. Explained nothing. Answered no questions. Something in him had died on that mountain. But something else had been born. And it was waiting. Quiet. Patient. Heavy as thunder before a storm. August heat could bleed the strength out of a man, especially on the open road where the horizon never seemed to get closer. Elias had spent years under that sun, driving cattle, repairing fences, working ranches that were never his. He didn't speak much anymore. He worked, slept, woke, worked again. Some men talked about him in town, said he'd lost something long ago. Others said he'd left his spirit buried in the mountains. He didn't argue. Whatever part of him used to laugh had gone silent. Copper Creek kept on moving, slow as always, as if nothing had changed. But Elias had changed. The world had cut something out of him and left scar tissue behind. He was on a supply run that day, riding along a dry stretch where the road dipped into a shallow ravine. The wind carried dust like smoke from an invisible fire, and the sun stung his eyes. His horse slowed before he even saw anything, sensing something ahead. A shape lay on the road, slumped beside a horse that looked starved and exhausted. The closer he rode, the clearer the figure became. A man, barely holding to consciousness, skin burnt, lips cracked, body trembling. Elias dismounted, boots hitting the ground soft and slow. He approached without hurry. Life on the plains taught men not to rush toward trouble. He knelt and turned the man's face, expecting perhaps a traveler, a thief, or some unlucky soul who had miscounted his water. But the moment the face came into view, the world shifted, just slightly, in the way a heart shifts before it breaks again. Jonah. Not the Jonah he remembered, not the man who smiled like sunrise and believed he could outrun fate. This man was hollow, thin. His eyes were bruised not from fists, but from regret. From the kind of guilt that drains years from a man's life in a matter of nights. Jonah tried to speak, but the words came out cracked. Elias lifted him up, leaning him against a rock for shade. Jonah's breath shook. For a moment they just looked at each other, years of silence packed into a single, heavy stare. Jonah's voice trembled when it finally came. It took everything, Eli, everything I touched, I ruined. I thought I was taking hold of fate, but I was only feeding something dark in me. He swallowed, his hands weak and shaking. The silver bought me men, land, power, or I thought it did. But men who chase silver ain't loyal. They're hungry, and hunger doesn't love you. It only waits for a moment to devour you. His eyes filled, not with the tears of a man asking forgiveness, but with the tears of one already damned. I ran the wrong men. I made deals I couldn't pay. I left people broken. There are men behind me now, men who ain't coming for silver. They're coming for me, to bury what's left. His breath caught, his shoulders shaking. And I can't outrun what I've done anymore. He reached out and grabbed Elias's hand with surprising strength. Please, end this, before they do. I don't deserve to keep breathing air I stole from better men. You owe me this. Elias's hand tightened around the grip of his revolver for reasons he couldn't even name. Anger was not foreign to him, not anymore. He had carried bitterness like a stone in his chest for years. He had imagined finding Jonah again more times than he wanted to admit. And in every one of those imaginings, there was a gunshot. But now, kneeling in the dust beside a man who looked more like a ghost than a memory, Elias felt something unexpected. Not rage, not vengeance, sadness, deep and heavy, like the kind that comes when you realize a story you loved has already ended, and you are only living in its shadow. Jonah lowered his head, voice almost a whisper. I ain't asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for an ending. Elias's fingers brushed the handle of his gun once more. It felt familiar, easy, the simplest act in the world. Just lift, aim, breathe out, end it. But Jonah had once given him half his bread in winter when they were boys. Jonah had once stood in front of a bullet meant for him. Jonah had once been the only soul in the world who looked at Elias like he mattered. A lifetime was built between two men, even if it ended broken. Hoofbeats echoed across the ravine then, distant, but closing. Jonah flinched. His eyes widened with the terror of a hunted animal. They followed, he whispered. Elias stood, shoulders squaring, the quiet resolve of a man who had already decided something long before he realized it consciously. He didn't draw slow. He didn't hesitate. The revolver came up in one smooth motion, no longer to kill Jonah, but to protect him. Riders appeared over the ridge, hard-faced men with rifles slung and cruelty carved into their expressions. Men who looked like they had stopped dreaming long ago. They didn't call out warnings. They didn't negotiate. They came to finish what had begun somewhere far behind Jonah's story. Elias fired first. Gunfire cracked and thundered through the ravine. Dust kicked up. Horses screamed. Bullets ricocheted off rock. Elias moved like a man who had been waiting his entire life for something to fight that actually mattered. Jonah, weak as he was, dragged himself to fallen rifles and fired with shaking arms. The fight wasn't graceful. It was desperate, raw, survival carved through sweat and grit. When the last horse fell and the last gun went silent, the air was thick with dust and the metallic scent of blood. Elias stood breathing slow, chest heavy, revolver smoking. Jonah sat in the dirt, head bowed, shoulders trembling. He didn't speak for a long time. The sun lowered itself toward evening, stretching shadows long across the ground. When Jonah finally looked up, there was something fragile in his expression. Something childlike, something Elias recognized from long ago. You should have let me go, Jonah rasped. Elias holstered the gun, boots silent in the dirt. His voice when it came was low, steady, unshaken. No, we finished things together. Jonah's tears came then, silent, hard, shaking tears that broke open everything inside him. He leaned forward, forehead pressed to the ground like a man finally laying down a burden that had been crushing him for years. They didn't speak further. The road ahead was long. Redemption doesn't come easy. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's miles. Hard miles. But they rode on. Two men. Two ghosts. Two brothers. Broken, but not alone.